Hello and welcome to Observations, Women in Art and Design History. My name is Donna McComb and I'm Assistant Director of Curatorial and Audience Engagement here at the NGV. And it's wonderful to welcome you today for Modern Art and Design Innovators, the final chapter in our 2022 Observations Seminar Series. Today we explore the period of 1930 to 1970 to examine a period of rapid shifts taking place both culturally and politically across the world. And in particular, we shine a light on the women artists and designers who reimagined modernism and exported their radical new ideas across the world. Our presenters, all leading historians and academics in their fields, highlight the work of pioneering women artists and designers. We commence with Juliet Kinshin, Emeritus Curator of Modern Design at MoMA and Adjunct Professor at New York's Bard Graduate Center. Juliet explores the important role of women designers and the modern interior. Jean Richards then shares a personal perspective on her mother, Eva Zeisel, a pioneering industrial designer who was born to a Jewish family in Hungary and at the outbreak of World War II emigrated to the United States. We then move from Europe to China with Phyllis Teo, author of Rewriting Modernism, for an overview of the contribution and significance of Chinese women artists in the discourse of modernity in the 20th century. Back in the context of the United States in the mid-20th century, abstraction is the focus of Elizabeth Smith's presentation on key American women artists of the period, such as Helen Frankenthaler. Smith, who is Executive Director of the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation, dives into her work and the time in which abstract expressionism was emerging as the leading modern art form. And finally, we pay tribute to one of the leading female designers of the 20th century, Charlotte Perriand. Perriand was instrumental in the development of modernist furniture, open-plan living and modular systems for furnishing and construction, which have endured as key design principles today. Leading the discussion of Perriand's work is Dr. Jane Hall, author of Breaking Ground, Architecture by Women, Justin McGurk, Chief Curator at the Design Museum in London, and Zoe Ryan, Director of the Institute of Contemporary Art at the University of Pennsylvania. We are absolutely thrilled you could join us for such an enlightening and important series of discussions. Please enjoy Modern Art and Design Innovators, presented today as part of the NGV's seminar series, Observations.
Welcome to the NGV seminar, Observations, Women in Art and Design History. My name is Amanda Dunsmore and I'm Senior Curator of International Decorative Arts and Antiquities here at the NGV. It's wonderful to welcome you all back to our first lecture in today's series, titled Interior Propositions, Women and the Modern Interior with Juliet Kinshin. Juliet is an independent design historian and former curator of design at the Museum of Modern Art, New York. Here, she organised a series of exhibitions highlighting women's contributions to modern design, including Counterspace, Design and the Modern Kitchen, Century of the Child, Designing Modern Women, 1890 to 1990, and How Should We Live? Propositions for the Modern Interior. She has held faculty positions at the University of Glasgow and Glasgow School of Art in Scotland, as well as at the Bard Graduate Centre in New York. And she's also held curatorial positions at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and at Glasgow Museums and Art Galleries. Thank you all for joining us today, and it's now my great pleasure to welcome Juliet to speak to us on Interior Propositions, Women and the Modern Interior. Thank you, Juliet.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm really delighted to reconnect with the NGV albeit virtually this time, having had the pleasure of working with you and colleagues there on the 2018 exhibition MoMA at NGV. And I'm delighted too today to be able to talk about two of my pet subjects, which have long preoccupied me as a design historian, professor, curator, and that is modern interiors and women designers. As you noted, most recently from 2008 to 2019, I worked as a curator in the Department of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And MoMA is an institution which, in its first 3 decades, it opened in 1929, really played an influential role in shaping the way we think about modern interiors. I think this canonical view of modernism, very much though with a focus at that stage on individual male architect designers who were wrestling with a binary range of conflicts, struggling to overcome historicism and rising to the challenge of new materials and mass production, struggling between retrograde decorative impulses and moving towards tectonic values of form and structure, and trying to reject useless, so-called useless design in terms, in preference for socially useful design. And when you begin to look at those kind of binary conflicts through the lens of gender, women don't come out very well. As you can see from this manual on Guide to Household Taste in 1954, where women are very much presented as a kind of reactionary force holding back the onward march of good design. These are really powerful cultural constructs that have been so embedded in the popular culture of films, fiction, advertising, that they've really entered collective consciousness. I think that's why something like Thurber's cartoon of Woman House in 1943 has a humor, touches a chord with people. Women haven't, as I say, come out so well in this kind of conventional narrative of modern interiors and modern design. So as a curator, I've been very much trying to tweak this narrative and find ways of telling richer, more inclusive stories of modern design. And that's been the driving force behind additions I've made to the permanent collection and the type of exhibitions I've undertaken. And when you're looking at the overlooked, whether that's the area of design like kitchens or design for children, inevitably that one leads one to women designers. And shining light on women designers is to raise the visibility of areas and types of design that are crucial but often sidelined. So I'll be looking today at some of these women who, from the 1920s to 50s, have been powerful advocates of collaborative, socially grounded design in ways that really challenge those stereotypical perceptions of women and interiors. Their contribution hasn't always been recognized. I've always been interested in looking at architecture from the inside out, but MoMA collection of architectural models and drawings encourages our visitors to focus on exterior form and elevations of buildings or unfurnished floor plans. The cataloguing of architectural projects really prioritizes the name of the individual, usually male architect, in shaping the architectural shell. But what of the multisensory richness and complex functioning of a building's innards and the huge range of materials, technologies, and professional skills that feed into the interior? How to represent them in a museum context? And how can we find ways of talking about the intrinsically collaborative nature of architectural projects? And in doing so, foreground the creative roles of women, not just as passive consumers of design, but as creative clients, educators, and design professionals. Another challenge, curatorial challenge, that I'll be reflecting on is how we collect and exhibit those more ephemeral elements of the modern interior. We like to have clear-cut labels and defined masterworks. And in many ways, it's easier to perhaps justify an acquisition of architect designed furniture that has real name pulling power and a clear market value than it is to acquire a piece of rather anonymous looking upholstery fabric or wallpaper, which doesn't make so much sense on its own, but when you see it working in the synthetic context of interior design, it really adds so much in the harmony, texture, and multisensory appeal of these interiors. And this all goes back to also how we address the marginalization of women in any museum collection, I think. And that's something I know that curators around the world, I'm not alone in struggling with how to find ways of addressing that. But I think it's interesting, and I hope to show how by taking a more inclusive approach and focusing on women, that can really begin to inflect the way we talk about innovation and creativity more generally. So these are all the challenges that were buzzing around in my head when I curated an exhibition called How Should We Live? Propositions for the Modern Interior in 2016. And it's these propositions that I want to turn to now to explore the kind of complex collaborations that have shaped the modernist interior. And the exhibition and my talk was organized around specific environments, dating from the 20s to the 50s, whether those were recreated exhibition displays, retail spaces, or domestic interiors. Although not spelt out in the exhibition title, each environment did highlight one or more female designers who, in these turbulent decades, were breaking into professions previously closed to them and forging these international networks. And it's an approach that is very much not focused on looking at isolated masterworks, but drawing attention to this synthesis of elements that I was talking about, and the ways in which individuals work together in exploiting not only new materials and technologies, but modern forms of publicity and distribution. So first up, the Velvet Silk Cafe in 1927, designed in Germany, shown in Berlin in Germany, and designed by Lilly Reich, with tubular steel furniture designed by her better-known partner, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. This cafe environment was presented as part of an exhibition on women's fashion in Berlin. and the general public were given a chance their first chance, in fact, to try out the cantilevered tubular steel chairs with no back legs and consume modern culture with their coffee and with the scent of nearby perfume fountain and music program wafting through the cafe space. Just as daring and innovative as the tubular steel chairs was Reich's use of copious quantities of silk and velvet. You're not entering a rectangular box, but getting a sense of free-flowing space, which is defined by her use of textiles. And the immersive experience that she created really opened the consumer imagination to new conceptions of space and to the sensuous appeal of materials. It was all a play on the contrasts of glinting metal, black leather, and smoky glass with these colored textiles. And in a sense, it's Lilly Reich's waving fabric walls which dissolved those conventional distinctions between structure and decoration, between inside and out, masculine and feminine, between distinctions between fashion and architecture, because actually Lilly Reich herself had come from a textile background. And she was the first woman, in fact, to join the German Werkbund's board of directors. This was an organization trying to bring together manufacturers, designers, retailers. And she'd run a successful design studio since 1914, specializing in clothing and interiors. And you can see how she brought that expertise to her 15-year partnership with Mies van der Rohe. The cafe was a real testing ground for works they went on to collaborate on together. The famous German pavilion at the Barcelona International Exhibition in 1929, or the Villa Tugendhat, where often Lilly Reich's name isn't mentioned, but the textiles were key to those projects, as were her skills as an exhibition designer. Again, exhibition design is one of those ephemeral forms of interior design, which is really difficult to collect and recapture in a museum context. But what we did was to try and build in a pop-up cafe to our recreation as part of our exhibition in 2016 to communicate some of that multisensory appeal. And MoMA's Philip Johnson, who's the first curator of architecture in MoMA, while he was still a student at Harvard University in 1927, he went and visited many of the projects of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich in Germany, including a 1927 exhibition on Die Wohnung, the dwelling, held in Stuttgart, Germany. And he was so inspired by these exhibitions that the couple had designed that he commissioned them to design his first New York apartment in 1930. As he wrote to his mother, he explained, "It would be the first room entirely in my latest style in America. I think it would be the cheapest possible kind of publicity for my style. The whole would be elegant, but so simple. I think that's interesting, the way he so much identified at the start of his career at MoMA in the Department of Architecture, viewing the design of his apartment as a touchstone for his curatorial practice and as a laboratory for ideas of how to live simply in a modern age with contemporary design. And I think you can see the impact that Lilly Reich's and Mies's redesign of his apartment also had on his own curatorial design of installations, like the renowned machine art exhibition in 1934. I mean, their treatment, for example, of his bedroom had an almost monastic feel. You have a single tubular steel frame bed and white walls with nothing on them. But on the other hand, you have these dramatic floor to ceiling navy blue silk curtains. And those silk curtains pick up on the beautiful quilted Chinese silk navy blue bedspread. These are hallmarks of Lilly Reich. And that bedspread, which is in MoMA's collection, was quilted like the jacket that Lilly Reich designed, which I showed you on the previous slide. So this reductive yet texturally rich scheme was really informing Johnson's own practice as an interior architect and exhibition designer. My first really important acquisition back in 2009 in MoMA was an example of the so-called Frankfurt kitchen, another legendary German interior designed by a woman, Grete Lihotzky. So many of its features are still familiar in kitchens today. The really efficiently organized layout, the standardized built-in cupboards and continuous work surfaces, and the integrated supply of gas, electricity, hot water. These were revolutionary at the time, really transforming the drudgery of solid fuel stoves and really difficult to work in kitchens, dark, dingy spaces hidden from view usually. So these are now so familiar, it's perhaps difficult to appreciate what a transformation it represented. But really, the kitchen, the new kitchen of the 20s and 30s, of which the Frankfurt kitchen was a paradigm, encapsulated the tenets of international modernism. And it's about interiors and architecture experienced from the inside out. Grete Lihotzky joined the team put together by Ernst Mies in the city of Frankfurt, where there was a major housing crisis precipitated by the First World War and rampant inflation. The response was this ambitious program known as the New Frankfurt, which encompassed the construction of affordable public housing and modern amenities throughout the city. So at the core of that whole vision of social urban transformation were between 10 and 12,000 of these prefabricated kitchens by Lihotzky, constructed as an integral element of the new dwelling units. And they were all manufactured within little more than 4 years. And that whole Frankfurt project's integration art, design, and environment, I think, in my view, remains one of the modern movement's really greatest achievements. The kitchen was really designed like a laboratory or factory and based on contemporary theories about efficiency, hygiene, and workflow. Lihotzky conducted detailed time motion studies and interviews with housewives and women's groups to find out really how to optimize the way this really small footprint of a space was used. So each kitchen came complete with a swivel stool, gas stove, built-in storage, drop-down ironing board, an adjustable ceiling light, and a removable garbage drawer. Labeled aluminium storage bins, which she adapted their design from the production of cartridge cases. These storage bins allowed for the tidy organization of staples like sugar and rice, as well as for easy pouring. So Schutter Lihotzky, I should also add, was the first Austrian woman to qualify as an architect, although she went on to work in many other areas, not just kitchen design, and always felt she was rather pigeonholed by this kitchen at the end of it. But it was a remarkable achievement. Rather more luxuriant, although equally austere, was the interior created by Anglo-Irish designer Eileen Grete, who came to architectural design late in her life after achieving really significant success as a furniture and interior design in Paris. And her first major work was this small vacation home by the sea at Roquebrune, Cap Martin in the south of France. And it was designed for her mentor, one-time partner, the architect editor Jean Badovici. So the name E1027 was a cipher for their intertwined initials, again representing the collaborative nature of the project, because definitely Badovici fed into the design as well. And they lived together there for a number of years. So Badovici designed on specific details, and he publicized the finished work in the magazine he edited. But the overall conception and this really compelling synthesis of architecture and furnishing was definitely Grete's. She was strongly influenced by her contemporary Le Corbusier and his new architecture, but did feel that much modernism was rather formulaic and conceived for the pleasure of the eye more than for the well-being of its inhabitants. She spent, or had the luxury of spending 2 years at the site for the E1027, studying the movements of wind and sun to develop a house really attuned to its setting. And she personally supervised the construction of this. The basic form of the house is this white rectangular box on stilts. But within that deceptively simple exterior, Grete really layered the progression from land to sea on the sloping site. And it's full of real thoughtful planning and the complex integration of sliding doors, storage walls, and multifunctional furniture, really a sequence of very flexible spaces that could be expanded or contracted as required, and all thought through from the user's viewpoint in terms of his or her bodily experience, comfort, and convenience. Her relationship with Le Corbusier remained cordial, but somewhat ambivalent, not least on account of his later almost symbolic erasure of her talent in painting out a couple of her murals when he was staying at E1027. Slightly more affirmative was the relationship, I think, between Le Corbusier and Charlotte Perriand, which also had its up and downs, but it was a very fruitful collaboration, which started in 1928, when Perriand actually approached Le Corbusier about working in his Paris studio. She wasn't really put off by the fact that initially he rebuffed her with what she recalls as this memorable put down: "We don't embroider cushions here." But she did end up working in the office for the next decade. And one of the first projects she worked on with Le Corbusier and his cousin Pierre Jeanneret was this collection of equipment for a domestic interior at the Salon d'Automne in Paris in 1929. Metal, she wrote, plays the same part in furniture as cement does in architecture. It is a revolution, she declared. And this line, the trio's iconic tubular steel furniture was showcased in an interior at the Salon d'Automne with a textured glass floor lit from beneath to refract light onto a glass ceiling. And the whole really did create another rather Parisian vision of deluxe modernity. The chair designs were directly related to the position of the human body, and I think that ergonomic appeal of the furniture partly explains their continued reproduction by and their collection in many museums around the world. Although quite often they are simply attributed to Le Corbusier rather than the full trio who worked so closely together on this set of furniture. I particularly enjoy the fact that in one of the exhibitions to showcase the furniture that Perriand designed, she actually showed the famous chaise longue on a machine woven carpet of a leopard skin, adding a kind of I think adding a nice ironic and slightly humorous touch to the presentation of this iconic piece. My next interior is the New York apartment of American textile designer Marguerite Mergentime. And it's one of many examples of the creative role of women as clients. Often such women were professionals in their own right, cultivated people who aspired with their architects to arrive at a different pattern of domesticity. And these women were deeply involved in the design process. You could think, for example, another example would be the role of Truss Schroeder, working with Rietveld in the Netherlands on the design of her famous Rietveld Schroeder house in Utrecht. In Depression era New York, where architectural commissions were few and far between, the opportunity to remodel Mergentime's apartment was a real lifeline for Austrian émigré Frederick Kiesler. Both of them belonged to the American Union of Decorative Artists and Craftsmen, AUDAC. This was an organization set up in 1929, like the same year, in fact, as the Union des Artistes Modernes in France, of which both Charlotte Perriand and Eileen were founder members. So this organization, AUDAC, was set up to unite, quote, practical modernists applying their art within the limits of commercial practice. Mergentime, who was a successful textile designer, wanted a multifunctional environment that would accommodate family life, a studio space, and business-related entertainment. In that sense, her home was a showcase for her own designs and those of others in her professional network. She herself designed many household textiles, including a wonderful political tablecloth, where she'd playfully added all these political slogans to the tablecloth as a kind of talking point to encourage social interaction. Kiesler at the time was experimenting with cast aluminium, a metal normally reserved for kitchen utensils and aeroplane parts, also with plastics and industrial glass, and prototyping new forms of furniture and lighting that he hoped would be put into wider production. So in that sense, rather like E1027 or some of these other domestic interiors, it's a testing ground for ideas, propositions for a potential model that could be available to a much wider audience. In this case, the apartment space was sculpted by light diffused through translucent materials and bounced off reflective surfaces. A glass block partition fractured the light, merging spaces formerly divided into closed cubicles. So again, this idea of opening up the interior spaces, this idea of free-flowing forms of the modern interior. The amoeba-shaped nesting tables and swiveling eye of the sprouting floor lamp reflected the era's cinema and surrealist art. And Kiesler was also really interested in shop design and shop interiors. And these interests were shared with Mergentime. In fact, in one of the photographs of the the published photographs of the apartment, you can see a copy of Minotaur, the famed surrealist magazine to which she subscribed. You can see it lying on the glass table. We added a spun aluminium bowl by Russell Wright, another member of the Audac organization. The apartment was indisputably modern, and it really presaged the kind of organic, more form-fitting design of the 1940s and 50s. Yet it epitomizes a strand of 1930s American design that MoMA really marginalized in favor of their really strong promotion of the so-called international style of architecture and design. I think, again, the importance of Mergentime's textiles within her interiors. These textile elements, as we've already seen in other interiors, are precisely the kind of things that we lose sight of when we're looking at interiors from the past. And often because these are the most ephemeral and perishable or easily lost elements of the interior, but so important to the overall feel and texture of them. Another husband and wife team I'm moving on to now is that of Aino and Alvar Aalto. They were also very well known for more organically shaped furniture, usually in plywood, which you can see as a more humanist alternative in many ways to the tubular steel furnishings of the period. And I would also add, though, that as a couple, they had a far-reaching impact on the modern interior through Artek, their forward-thinking design company and an international retail operation. Artek, which is a synthesis of art and technology, was co-founded by the Aaltos in 1935 with Mary Gulliksen and Niels Gustav Hall, two similar-minded patrons and critics. And at its very core was a mission to promote an integrated modernist approach to the design of interior spaces, not just throughout the Nordic countries, but beyond. And indeed, they exhibited very successfully at the New York World's Fair, for example, in 1939, or 2 years earlier at the Paris International Exhibition in 1937. The first Artek store opened in Helsinki in 1936, showcasing home furnishings as well as modern artworks by artists like Jean Arp, Alexander Calder, Pablo Picasso, Ferdinand Léger, which were installed partially in an adjoining gallery. They were also offering glass and textiles designed by the Aaltos and craft goods from around the world. You can see here one of the glass tumblers designed by Aino Aalto. So this Artek store was helping to break down hierarchies between fine and applied arts in a holistic approach to modern decor. This was their proposition offered to the consuming public. And in doing so, they connected to a vast network of modern architects, designers, importers, wholesalers, and went on to distribute their distinctive bentwood furniture all over the world through other retailers like Wohnbedarf in Switzerland and Finmar in the UK. Aino Aalto was really a driving force in Artek's success until her death in 1949. And as the head of Artek's interior design division, she was responsible for significant public and residential interior commissions. Her hand is present in nearly all of her husband's architectural projects of these years. And she also achieved acclaim independently for her designs of children's furniture, kitchens, and textiles, those areas in which so many women have excelled. Their work in some ways, I think, relates closely to that of Noémie and Antonin Raymond, another husband-wife couple of architect designers. In the 30s and 40s, various designers were exploring combinations of European, American, and vernacular Japanese approaches to the modern interiors. The transmission of a Japanese influence to an American or European context, or vice versa, was often ambiguous and filtered through cultural preconceptions. Nevertheless, such exchanges really informed ambitions to create interior design for international markets that could negotiate the global and local with sensitivity, and sensitivity to the coexistence of contemporary crafts and industrial production. In Japan and then New Hope, Pennsylvania, Noémie Raymond and her architect husband, Antonin, was a training ground for esteemed designers such as Yunzo Yoshimura and George Nakashima. They worked together collaboratively in these studios. And as a group, they aspired to blend the pared down aesthetics of modernist design with a commitment to craft or semi-mechanized techniques. Perriand, who reached Tokyo in 1940, shortly before Japan's entry into the Second World War, was one of a string of Europeans working with the Japanese government program to reinvigorate the crafts and to develop industrial design practice. Part of this involved her setting up an exhibition in Tokyo in 1941, organized with the help of Yunzo Sakakura. For Perriand, the experience underlined a disciplined simplicity in furnishings and the flexible use of modest interior spaces, and the potential for quality productions achieved by the imaginative adaptation of traditional materials such as bamboo and artisanal methods. The outbreak of war actually forced her to remain in Vietnam until 1946. And that time in Asia had a profound impact on her design sensibility. And it's at this point, really, that low-cost vernacular furniture in organic wood and cane replaced her chrome and glass equipment of living that we looked at of the 1930s. When Noémie Raymond submitted her textiles to MoMA's competition for organic design in home furnishings that was held in 1940, her textiles were actually submitted in the name of her husband, Antonin Raymond. This was actually a quite common pattern. And you see a similar pattern of erasure in the husband-wife Eames partnership, Ray and Charles Eames, of which you'll be hearing more, I think, from Pat Kirkham. MoMA's program of these kind of exhibitions and competitions, the so-called Good Design program that matured in the 1940s and 50s, was really helping to forge new connections between designers, manufacturers, retailers, consumers, and did launch the career of numerous world-famous designers, among them Charles Eames, Eero Saarinen, Danish Hans Wegner. Less celebrated were the many talented women whose designs were also frequently shown in these exhibitions, but often, in some cases, anonymously or under their husband's names. You just have to look at the MoMA exhibition of plywood furniture that both Ray and Charles had developed collaboratively, held in 1946. It was entitled New Furniture, designed by Charles Eames. And you get the same thing again in their submission of entries to MoMA's International Low-Cost Furniture Competition in 1948. Although jointly developed, it was submitted in Charles' names only. It's taken some 50 years to give designers like Ray Eames and Noémie Raymond their rightful due in MoMA's cataloguing of these designs. While their designs with their designs for molded plywood furniture, the Eames, they embraced new materials and means of mass production that responded to resource shortages using wartime ingenuity. After they exhibited a number of their experimental chairs, tables, and storage pieces at MoMA in 1946, the Herman Miller Furniture Company began to distribute and mass produce their molded plywood pieces based on their prototypes. And the widely published home they created in Los Angeles was another joint project, outfitted with the Eames's own lightweight plywood furniture and decorated with rather whimsical bric-a-brac from around the world. These interiors, like some of the others we've looked at, were carefully staged in their decoration and for social gatherings for clients and design world luminaries. One of the companies also connected with the Eameses was that of Knoll. The Knoll Furniture Company and Textile Company, their fortuitous combination of talented designers with manufacturing and retail expertise opened up an international market for modern home furnishings. The guiding force behind the success of it was the architect designer Florence Knoll, who'd studied with Eliel Saarinen and Mies van der Rohe and had widely traveled in Europe and Scandinavia. In 1946, she married Hans Knoll, and as his full business partner, immediately set about completely revamping the company's image. Part of that was a redesign of Knoll's Manhattan showroom, which she herself undertook with Herbert Matter, another associate of the Eameses. So in their showroom, clients again experienced an environment of total modern design, very different from conventional cluttered stores. And Herbert Matter used a simple device of a cord screen to define the foyer while presenting a tantalizing view of the displays beyond. And Florence Knoll devised a trellis-like display system for samples of the textiles by European and American designers, many of them women, that both created an abstract composition of texture and color and facilitated seasonal changeovers. These innovative showrooms and exhibition stands with a strongly planned architectural feel were a major contribution. Many clients of the Knoll company recall the showrooms as the place where they came to understand and really appreciate the modern interior. And finally, I want to return to a collaborative partnership I've already looked at between Charlotte Perriand and Le Corbusier, and in this instance, also Lucio Costa, the Brazilian architect. And that is the study bedroom in the Maison du Brésil, part of the Cité Universitaire in Paris. And this was a commission that Perriand was brought in to develop a modular scheme for the interiors of the building, which had been designed collaboratively by Le Corbusier and Lucio Costa. Again, she's using durable industrial materials, aluminium, concrete, linoleum, formica, and brightly colored plastics, played off against the warmth of woods, which would have been familiar to students from Brazil. The whole project was built in a spirit of post-war idealism. And this compact and versatile space represented a modernist blueprint for independent living, an investment in citizens of the future. It was one of 95 such units designed in the Maison du Brésil. So these examples that we've looked at today, I think you can see that idealism and that rich creativity and role of women designers in spreading ideas of modern art and pioneering new attitudes to modern living. And I think as the long and rich history of women in modern design becomes more widely appreciated, it'll become harder to ignore the achievements of these many remarkable women who've been overshadowed by the reputations of more famous male associates, or have yet to be represented in museum collections. And I think it'll encourage us to look at perhaps different forms of creativity and innovation that have fed into these spaces. Role models, I think, in visual practices where women remain underrepresented, remain important, as does the need to recognize and encourage these varied forms of creativity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for such a fascinating, thought-provoking presentation. You've really certainly given me a lot to think about, I have to say. Our next presentation today will be Eva Zeisel, Pioneering Industrial Designer, a personal perspective given by Jean Richards, her daughter, which will begin shortly. We look forward to seeing you there. And thank you again, Juliet. Thank you.
My pleasure.